Welcome to the Cookies and Coffee podcast. My name is Cale Owen.
And my name is Maggie Owen. I am the VP of Operations and Cale is the CEO. And together we run 2 8-figure businesses and we are in the middle of building a startup.
And this podcast is to document our journey as high-level executives, as parents, and as husband and wife, so that we can share what's working for us, what we found that doesn't work, lessons, tips, and tricks, so that if you are married and working together or want to do that, you can learn from what has worked for us and for many other people so that you can have an incredible marriage, an incredible business, and an incredible life. Today, we want to talk about navigating business relationships with personal relationships as a married couple at a high level in business.
Yeah.
Cool. I think it's interesting. A lot of comments that I'm seeing, at least on social media, of like being an entrepreneur owner. It's like, technically I'm not an entrepreneur because yes, I have stock in it, but I'm also an employee.
Yeah.
So, been entrepreneurs, but right now we're employees in this stage of life, which is really cool. We also get a chance to play a different game than we've ever played in the past.
Yeah.
Which is really cool. So today's topic is navigating those 2 relationships. Like, how do we make sure that we're not just all in on just doing business and then we just forget about each other on the relationship side? How do we make sure that we keep the relationship tight, really good, and super strong? And then also not fall off and hold each other accountable on business.
Yeah. I think also too important context, before we had the roles that we have now, we owned and operated a business together that technically we started together, but you ran and operated before I came into the business. And then, a couple years in, then I also stepped into the business. So I think that was the beginning of us having to navigate owning and operating business together, and being married and being new parents.
Yep.
Newly parents. We had, I was pregnant with our second, our oldest at the time, I think it was like 2. And so it was rough for the first couple of years, like navigating through that and like what that looked like. Because we weren't used to having to communicate on a different level. And we weren't used to having to resolve conflict in like a structured way. Whereas like, we would, there's like an acceptable way to resolve business conflict for the most part that everyone kind of feels is an acceptable way to get to a resolution. But like married, I feel like it's kind of like a free for all most of the time for people. It's like, we can yell, we can scream, we can play the silent treatment game. It's like, there's all these different things that would never work in the workplace. And so I feel like I had one standard way previously before we came into business together that I would resolve conflict, which usually was like not talk to you for a couple of days and then for kind of like brush it off because I didn't want to talk about it. And, your style was, no, there's a problem. We're going to like sit down and talk through it right now. And I'm like, I don't want to talk about it. Like, I don't even want to talk to you right now. But I'm like, you could never do that at work. I could never just decide I don't want to resolve this conflict or have this hard conversation. I mean, you could, and then the business would probably fail.
Or it wouldn't last long as an employee.
Right.
So. Yeah.
And so I think that was like the first big eye opener for both of us when we like went into business together. It was like, oh, wow, we can't, like what we're doing at home is not what we can do in the business. And like, it's not working. And so what are we going to do to resolve? How are we going to have both? Like, how are we going to have a working relationship and a great personal relationship too?
When do you think that switch happened? Because I'm trying to like, it was never like a big, I don't remember one specific moment, but.
I don't remember a single moment either. I think it was like, I just think like over time, like when I look back 5 years ago and just like our trajectory over the last 5 years and how our relationship has evolved from there, it was kind of like, I really think it's being in the trenches with somebody because you just develop not that I didn't respect you before at all. Like obviously you're my husband when we're married, of course I respected you, but there's like a different level of respect when you're like both in the trenches together, like trying to accomplish something for a bigger mission and purpose. And I think that really is like over time continuing to build a team and lead a team and make big decisions and fail and learn and grow. Like that has really, I feel like it was just those little things over the years kind of have added up and it just has created where it's like, okay, I don't want to resolve conflict that way because it's very disrespectful to you. And I don't want to do that because I respect you a ton and I want to continue to grow and I want the business to grow, whether it's ours or the one that we're growing right now, you know? So I agree. I don't think I had like a specific like turning point for us. It was more, okay, here's what we have to do to get to the next level. And if we continue to do what we're doing now, we're never going to get there. So like what has to change?
It was born out of necessity.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because we were in a point where with our business, we were struggling so much and underwater just within our family dynamics.
Yeah.
Just having a kid who didn't sleep for the first year, living in a studio, no money, then just going all in on this gym that we had. And then one of the aspects you talked about, I think is really important is being in the trenches, but then seeing results while also being in the trenches.
Yeah.
So instead of just like grinding it out and not seeing results, we started seeing results, and it was just a belief breaker for us. It was like, oh, we can do this.
Yeah.
And then it was a confidence booster for both of us. And I think it's no surprise to me that our business blew up when both of us were focused on it. And you came into the business on the operational side. And like, that's the reason why I was so successful. And that's why we both say this, but like there's a lot of power in married couples who go into business together and run businesses that are aligned at the top with the same vision, same goal, and they communicate well. They're extremely powerful and can grow really, really fast and do a lot of really cool things. Because you have someone, it's very hard in business to find someone who is aligned and you can truly trust. And when you have that inside of a business at the top, that's hard to break.
Yeah. I think, and most of the time, I would think it would be very rare that both the people at the top have the same skill set. It's like, that's super rare. So I think what works really well, especially in our dynamic, is you have a different skill set than I have. And so it's like, let's divide and conquer in those areas. And so I think that's probably the first thing that we did really well, or that we realized we had to do, is we clearly defined each of our roles. Like, here's what you're going to oversee and here's what I'm going to oversee. And then that's where the trust piece came in. It's like, we're going to trust that each of us is going to own those areas. And if we have a bottleneck somewhere, you know, I'll ask you for help, or like, hey, I'm really stuck here. Like you did too. Like, hey, I really need your operational brain to help think through this problem. What do you think is the best way to do it? And same, like, hey, there's a problem at the time, like there's a problem with coaching or our experience or whatever it might be. And I'd come to you with it. But I think it was really important that we clearly divided our roles and then trusted one another to get there. And we didn't cross lanes into it, because I think that's like the worst thing that you could do is, or at least one of the mistakes that I see with a lot of people, it's like they define the roles, but then the person who was in the business first, whether it was the male or the female, like whatever dynamic it was, like whoever was like in the business first, like tends to like come in and like micromanage, because that's the way that they did it before. And then that's how it started with us when we first came in. Right. And I'm like, if you want my help, I'm going to do it how I'm going to do it and trust that I'm going to do it, or you just do it. Either one. But like, we're not both going to do the same thing. Because it's a waste of time. And then there's a lot of frustration. So I think, making sure we clearly defined the roles and trusted one another to execute on them.
Even if there were mistakes on both sides, it was just like, cool, okay, made a mistake.
Right.
Now we need to move forward, and how do we fix it? That helps a ton. Having the clear roles defined and not crossing over is really important. I mean, it's something that we tell gym owners that we coach that are married. It's like, define your roles and don't cross over. Like, you should be aligned at the top from a metric standpoint, and you should both understand the metrics of the business, but you should own your responsibilities within the business and trust that person is going to do it. Because no one wants to be micromanaged, and they definitely don't want to be micromanaged by their spouse.
Yeah, no.
That's a killer right there, for sure. When did we start? Because I would go ahead and say that we do, in my opinion, an exceptional job of resolving conflict now. And we have for a pretty decent amount of time. And we didn't wake up and get married and immediately we're perfect at resolving conflict. Obviously, that's taken time. And the business has really helped us be able to do that. But like, what are some of the things that when you think of when we're in a place where we're not aligned or there's conflict, what are some of the things immediately that would be helpful for people listening to this that they can take from what we do and implement it into their life?
Yeah. I think the first thing is, or at least what I think has helped me the most, is like the headspace. making sure we're in the right headspace of when we're going to resolve it. Because, you know, sometimes we'll wrap up, let's say at 4:30 or 5 at work, and we might be right in the middle of something, but the kids have to get to sports, right? And so like that's super, like it's a little chaotic for an hour of like pick up. They're really excited to tell us about their day. We got to make sure they get fed, you know, get them off to their sports. And so it's like, okay, this conversation might have to wait an hour or 2 hours or whatever it might be. And being able to like block like, okay, this work conflict isn't going to be resolved right this second. Let's just like table it because neither one of us are in the right headspace to have this conversation. Let's go focus on the kids and like we'll circle back to it at nighttime or, you know, whenever the right time might be. But I think that was really big for us is knowing like, let's make sure we resolve whatever it is before we go to bed at night. But once kids kind of enter the dynamic, you know, there's, especially when they're young, I think when they're older, it's a little different. They like can understand a little bit more, but when they're younger, you know, picking them up right from school, they're not gonna be like, oh wait, hold on, my mom and daddy talk through this problem that we're having. Like they're just super excited to see us. They've been on daycare all day and they want, you know, to tell us about their day and be really excited. And so I think that was really big for me is trying to make sure we understood what type of headspace we were in to resolve the conflict, because sometimes it's not the right time. It doesn't mean that you're going to sit on it forever because you're avoiding the conversation. It's like, that's not why you wait on it. It's just because it's not the right time. Mm-hmm. You know, I think a good example of that too is, you know, GymCon that you were just planning for. Like there was some stuff going on in the business and I started to talk to you about it and you're like, I can't have this conversation until after this event. Like I can't be in this headspace prior to the event. Right. And I'm like, cool, that's great. You know, and so I think it's like you communicate that to me and I'm like, great, we'll put pause. I'll like create a list and we'll circle back to it after. And same with the personal side, like you were getting ready for this event and like you needed to be in a really good headspace for this. And so I just shouldered a lot of, I don't say the burden of being a parent because I don't think it's a burden to be a parent, but like I shouldered a lot of the extra responsibility, you know, because you would get up early and like work up until the point we had to leave. And so, you know, I would get the kids dressed for school. I would make their breakfast. I would make their lunch. I would, you know, make sure I could pick them up like at their time that they normally could, even if you couldn't. So it's like our normal routine kind of like went out the window, but you set the stage and the expectations first to like, let me know that. And I'm like, okay, cool. You're in that season right now. You know, I know it's only going to be a couple of weeks. And so here's what I'm going to do to make sure I can support you in that aspect.
And that was huge. I mean, when you're able to have, because that's hard for me because I feel selfish when I ask those, right? Because I understand the burden of the day-to-day, and kids are not a burden. However, it's the burden of the day-to-day activities of just living a life with kids while also being busy. And communicating that to you, I knew that it's like, hey, and this is where the full trust comes in. I knew that you would be okay with it. And even if you weren't okay with it, I was like, it still needs to happen. So I was like, from a business standpoint, I'd be like, no, like this has to happen. Yeah. So if you weren't, I'd be like, okay, we need to figure something out then. If we need to hire a nanny or we need to hire a babysitter, we need to do something to figure it out, then we'll figure it out. But like, I have to have this time. For those of you wondering, no, I'm not a simp. And the comments on some of these things are amazing. I love it. Anyways, the stuff doing that is so key because it gave me the headspace to be able to crush the event that we had. And there's so many things behind the scenes that make it happen. And it was really nice for me to just be able to focus on showing up, making sure that we delivered an incredible experience on stage and making sure we crushed what our goals were for it. I think it's super important to be able to do that. And there's always going to be those times because there's times in the business before where you've had to work really late. You've had major projects and we've had to switch it off. And like those seasons happens a lot more for me than I feel like for you, but because you can manage things, I feel like a little bit differently than I can.
Well, it's a different style of work too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mine's more deeper thought, creative, more strategic on that. Yours is very strategic too, but it's more operational, like tactical, like how are we going to do this? Yeah. Let's do this. So more task oriented. Mine's more thought oriented.
Yeah. Which like you kind of need like a closed off environment, like very distraction free, where it's like a lot of stuff most of the time that I could do with like the kids being crazy in the background if I had to.
Yeah.
Thankfully we don't have to do that very often, but if for some reason, you know, we could do that. I think, you know, it's even if you don't work together in business, I think that principle still applies to anybody, right? It's like if you have a major project at work that you're trying to complete, you're going to have to stay late. You know, just being upfront and communicating that instead of, I think a lot of times people are like, oh, well, this is an expectation of me, therefore it should be an expectation for you too. instead of just communicating, here's this is going to look like for the next week or 2 weeks while I figure this big project, like I might be home a little later. What can we do ahead of time to prepare? Can we pre-order meals ahead of time to make it easier? Just like anything, I think it just all comes down to communication. Being open, honest, and communicating what it's going to look like can just help on both sides.
And following through that. So like setting the expectation of like, I set the expectation with you. I was like, up until GymCon for these really 4 weeks up until GymCon, I'm like, I have to be all in on this. I was like, after GymCon, we'll have time. Like, we'll be good. It would be different if we had done this before, because there have been other seasons where I'm like, I got to focus on this in like short spurts of like, I have to do this. And you totally understand, because then I kept my word after, and I didn't just keep just pouring my head into work consistently and just forget about everything else. And I think it's important because there's going to be people that will comment on these and they will say, yeah, well, that's all well and good, except the person just keeps on working and doing their thing. Well, yeah, of course. Like, you have to be able to establish trust, and there has to be some sort of trust that you will follow through with what you said you would do. And if you can't do that, you're just a liar. So, and no relationship can be built on that. No successful relationship. Because then you're just going to, anytime you want, and I see this a lot with entrepreneurs, a lot, especially with guys that are dreamers and visionaries that are not fully successful and haven't thought things through, where they bounce from thing to thing because they think, oh, this is going to be the next thing. Oh no, I got this great idea. Or, hey, I have this whole thing. And they have a spouse, and this could be man or woman, is this visionary like dreamer, and their spouse is fully supportive. It's like, cool, go get it. But then over the years, over time, they just keep trying new things. And it's like, no, this will be the next one. Oh, this will be the next one. And it's like, at some point, just like, stop. You're just going down a path that you're not going to have the level of respect that you want from your spouse, the level of trust and the level of intimacy that you could have if you actually followed through with what you're saying. And at some point, I see this a lot with entrepreneurs, is they just keep failing. And they keep thinking the next thing is going to save them, instead of diving into the main problem in the business that they have and trying to focus solely on one thing and grow it. And they would be better off just being an employee at a business. And it may be boring for them, but for their family life and for everything else, it would be much better for them across the board to literally just have a job and then maybe do a side hustle on the side.
Yeah.
Instead of just constantly trying to put all this strain and stress on the family relationships while they're pursuing their dream and all these different opportunities. And if they never come to fruition, it's like, maybe it's you. Maybe you're not cut out to be an entrepreneur or a leader. Yeah. So I think what's interesting, and this may help people that are married and work together, one of the things that we do when we have conflict or we need to have tough conversations, navigating the aspect of me technically being CEO, also head of the household, but having those conversations of like, when we're at the house and it's like, we need to have a hard conversation, work related, setting the context for that. And we literally do like a hand motion, and it's just like, I'll come to you and be like, we're having a conversation. And it's like, cool. Okay. Are we good with this right now? Like, we good to have a business talk right now? And you'll be like, yes. Okay, cool. So I'll literally just take my hand, put it over my face, like I'm brushing my face, and be like, this is CEO to VP of Ops conversation. And you'll be like, cool. So now we're in work mode. And now it's like, now we take the same approach that we would with any other employee. We have a very direct conversation. We do not sugarcoat it, and we do it gracefully, but there's also like hey, like this needs to happen. And you've done the same with me. You're like, this is VP of Ops to CEO. Like, you're not holding up your end of the bargain.
Yeah.
And vice versa. And it allows us to really just almost air things out in a safe place that is separate and isolated and siloed from the relationship.
Yeah.
Where you're just switching your identity in that moment to the business side. And it makes it so much better that when we get out of that, it's like, okay, cool, back to where we were.
Yep.
And now it's like, great, we left it over there. We resolved it. We don't leave that space until it's resolved.
Yep.
Like, it's kind of weird. And I say space, but like, we don't leave that until we figured it out and it could be an hour. Like, our last one that we had was like 45 minutes, just literally standing in the bathroom.
Yeah, it was.
For like 45 minutes and just like going at it, like not yelling, not like doing any of that, but just like hard conversations of like, I don't think that's right. Or I think this is right. I think you're doing this wrong. This needs to be better. Like, these are the conversations that we have. But when it's
here's
done,
why I'm frustrated here, and you're like, this is why I'm frustrated.
Yeah. And fully communicating on that level. And then when it's done, it's like, cool, we've there's a resolution here, and now we're moving back into the relationship and we're good to go. And we always feel better after those every time.
Yeah.
Every time we have those conversations.
But then like usually when we have to have those conversations, it's because we're not aligned somewhere in the business and we just have, I would say like waited that long. It's just, we haven't had the conversation yet. And then it's just built up a little bit. But usually at this point, most of those types of conversations happen when we're not aligned on a problem or the direction we're going in the business or whatever it might be. And so it's us just communicating, getting aligned.
I think that's why the majority of relationships die is through a slow fade. And they die through a slow fade of little things that are done or not said over the course of time that lead up to a big explosion because individuals are unwilling to communicate their desires, their needs, and their problems within a relationship.
Yeah.
And there's lots of reasons why they may not do that. They may not trust their spouse. Their spouse may belittle them and put them down for these. They may brush off the things that their spouse is bringing to them on both sides and say, that's not a real problem.
Yeah.
Right. And put them down. And I think it's really important. And this is something you do such a great job of understanding that like, if it's a problem and I bring it up, because usually, I don't know, I feel like I'm pretty easygoing with most things, but there's certain things that I'm very particular about.
Yeah.
Yay or nay or no?
Yeah, no, I agree.
This is for the crowd more so than,
but you definitely can be a dick in some areas for sure.
Yes. However, I would like to believe that maybe it's not, but like there are things I've become more particular about things as I've gotten older. But you do such a good job of like, if I bring something up that matters, you are like, cool. Okay. Like this makes sense. And like, if we're joking around or whatever, you're like, that's dumb. Like you shouldn't. And it's like, okay, cool. No, you're right. But if it's something that I bring to you and I'm like, hey, I would really prefer it if you don't say this.
Yeah.
Like, I think there was early on, there was something, and I think you said something to me and I was just like, hey, and just gracefully go, not just, hey, don't say that. It was more just, hey, I would prefer it if you didn't say this and here's why.
Yeah.
And it's like, when you say this is what I hear and this is what I interpret it as.
Yeah.
And it's like, you're like, cool. Okay. Just won't.
I can't remember what that was.
I can't either. But like you also do a good job on other stuff if it's small stuff. And I think it's really important to be able to communicate that because I think there's because guys want to be respected big time. Like that is really it. Like if they could choose respect over love, they're going to choose respect all day long because that's the currency for men. And there are times, in my opinion, and I see this all the time with married couples, all the time, they will put them down publicly in front of their friends and they'll make side comments. They'll say these little things. And I personally cannot stand that because number one, I would never, if you said something to me and put me down publicly, like we're having a conversation, like immediately, like immediately.
I'd be so mad.
I'd be so upset because it's a reflection of how you feel about me.
Yeah.
Right. And it's the same thing for you. I'm not going to put you down publicly or privately. Like if I'm hanging with my buddies, I'm not saying stuff that's like a put down for you at all because why would I do that?
Yeah.
Because it's not respectful at all. And then I get around guys and thankfully my guy friends don't do this.
Yeah.
A couple do sometimes, but it's also like, like it's a check. It's like, are they really? Or is it like, maybe you should just look in the mirror.
Yeah.
But thankfully the guys that I've surrounded myself with are not like this and they don't do that. But I grew up in a locker room. So like been around a bunch of guys that put down their wives or their girlfriends and they say little comments. And if they're saying that, it's what they may be joking, but they're not at the same time because those are little things that bother them and they bring it up.
Yeah.
And they should be saying that to their spouse or their girlfriend. Don't say it to me. Say it to them. And they're like, oh, I've tried. No, you haven't. Like you've probably made a side comment. Or your tone was demeaning and not respectful.
Yeah.
And not bringing it up in a way that can resolve this type of conflict.
Yep.
I wish guys and girls, I wish just people in general, because there's only two genders. About to get canceled on that. Can't put this on YouTube now that I said that. I wish that men and women would be more, and this is very hard, I still struggle with it, more graceful in their communication with their spouse, in communicating exactly how they need their spouse to communicate with them. For an example, tone is really big, right? On how we communicate, as well as when you communicate, you talk about that a lot, is like, now's not a right time.
Yeah.
Right. Tone, as well as just the words that are used. And I think there are things that within every type of relationship that people want to be told or don't want to be told. And if you just simply communicated with your spouse, like, I would prefer it if you didn't call me this, or if you didn't use this word, or if you didn't put this belief on me, right? Then life would be a lot easier.
Yep. It's interesting about that. I think how the dynamics that you grew up in, like, shape a lot of how you communicate from, I'm thinking about it just from like a tone standpoint. Because like, I would rather like yell and raise my voice to get my point across. And I'm not even like really angry. It's just like, I associate elevated voices with like getting a point across and resolving a solution.
Apparently everybody else does as well.
But like, you didn't grow up in a family like that. And so it's funny because early on, like, I had to learn this. I think that's things, just part of being married. You learn a lot about the other person as you start to, go through life together. That's something that I had to learn with you, is like, oh, when you communicate, it's like very soft and gentle and like respectful. And I don't think shouting and raising your voice is disrespectful, but for a lot of people it is.
It is, right? For me.
Right.
Because if you do that, I'm going to be like Jackson, our son, and I'm just going to meet you and I'm going to go above it.
Right.
And then I'm just going to dominate. Then it's like, okay, all right, this is a battle. Okay. You sure you want to go there? It's like,
but I think it's funny. And I think we still work that, because I still will elevate, and you're still like pretty calm about it. But now you don't rise up to where I'm at. You usually like stay like even keel. And I'm like, okay, I'm like being over dramatic. I need to like bring it down a little bit on there. But it's interesting, because I think a lot of the times we don't take the time to understand the dynamics that people grew up in and how they respond to things, or how they're used to seeing conflict resolved. And I think one of the big things for us that has led to where we are now and having the relationships and dynamic that we do is that we recognize that, and we broke the belief that we had to stay in that way. Like, we had to stay resolving conflict that way just because that's the way we grew up. It's like we could develop our own way of how we wanted to resolve conflict, of what works best for us in our dynamic. But I don't think a lot of people take the time to like sit down and realize like, okay, here's where you came from, your family dynamics, how you grew up, and I don't think you had any trauma growing up. I feel like you had a very like
zero trauma.
Cushy
Zero trauma. I'm like one of the weirdos that had zero trauma growing up.
But I think it's like nowadays, like, it's being able to recognize that in your partner of like, did something happen to them? Did they have families that yell at each other? Did they like, I just think it's important to understand family dynamics and how they were raised and the environments they're around, because I think people show up almost all of the time, especially early on, before they can recognize and see it. And so I think it's really important to talk through those things and understand that, and then know that just because that's the way that it was, it's not the way that it has to be. And that you can figure out the best way to move forward and communicate with your spouse.
And that's the key, is like, what's the best way to communicate with your spouse? And like recognizing that with you. Because at first I was like, this doesn't make sense. Like, because you definitely responded way more to a higher tone, like higher level. Yeah. Just get after it.
I actually prefer that level of communication back to me. Like, I prefer that tone. Like, when you're like really soft and like, hey, listen, I really didn't like it when you said this to me, right? And I'm like, oh man, like, I feel like so much more put down with that than I would if you just like kind of came aggressively at it.
Maybe that's why I do it.
But it's just like interesting. Like, I perceive things differently than you perceive them, just because of the way I grew up in the environment. And I had an amazing childhood and environment. And my parents, can resolve conflict. They just do it differently than how we did, than how your parents did. And that's okay. But I think being able to like recognize that in one another. Yeah,
for sure. And it's key here too, because it's funny, this video that popped off and there's so many comments. I never said that my parents, in this video, I talk about the one piece of advice my mom gave us before we got married to have a successful, happy relationship. And it was make plans and make love, make plans together, to grow together, to live together, to accomplish things together, to do things together, to constantly grow together. And then make love is self-explanatory. And like, don't ever lose those two things. And in that, I gave the context of, I never heard my parents raise their voice to each other. They might have, they probably did at some point. It's not like they were perfect by any means. They had to sacrifice for each other. They had to go a lot of things. But in that clip, I never said that they didn't argue. And it's funny because people heard when I said, don't raise their voice. They were all like, oh, so they didn't have conflict? Congratulations. Like one person was like, someone commented about how great. So when you had to face conflict for the first time, you had no idea and you probably just like either blocked it out and didn't know how to communicate or whatever. And it's like, no, like I'm not an imbecile. They taught me how to resolve conflict. They just did it in a way that's different. And it's different based on the relationships. There are some relationships, amazing relationships, and they yell at each other. And that's just the way that they communicate. Yeah. And that's okay. We just don't. We can, but like we choose not to.
I yell in the relationship. You usually don't yell in the relationship.
Yeah. I've noticed what's funny over time though, if I raise my voice, you shut down. No.
Yeah, that's actually true. That was the other day.
Yeah.
You did. I was like, I'm not talking to you right now.
Yeah. You're just like, I'm not talking to you. And it's funny because you've gotten so used to me being like, cause you know, like when it's like this, you're like, okay, this isn't you. Like you're just angry.
Yeah.
Like
you're being an asshole. I'm not
I'm not going to have this conversation right now. And I think that's very funny.
Yeah.
Very funny. Because we basically trained each other on how we communicate.
Yeah.
Which is amazing.
Just a whole different topic.
Yeah.
That you could do. Anyway.
I think it's really good though. I think it's very important, especially this episode is way more for the married couples that work together, of just really clearly defining your communication and putting yourself in the space mentally, and sometimes physically, to be in the space to communicate on business. Cause you cannot, if you're in business together, you can't let the business slide because that is your livelihood, but you should never let your relationship take a backseat.
Yep.
Which is why we talk about integration. And it's so important to understand that how you do one thing is how you do everything, and how you communicate in your business and your relationships matter, and they can be the same way.
Yep.
And what it comes down to is not sugarcoating it, being very upfront, very straightforward on what's needed and what's not. And if you do that, like a lot of the problems go away.
Yep.
In businesses. Or you could just be a simp and just.
Because you definitely are for sure.
Yeah, 100%. Totally a simp. I know. What else?
And that's it. I think clearly defining roles is super important if you're in business together. Communicating.
Here's a question. So this was more for the married couples that work together. What about the ones that don't? Like I think the same practices apply, but it's slightly different because like we know the vast majority of people are not in business together. Mm-hmm. So they're not in the trenches together. So they have to work through communication slightly differently than married couples. In my opinion, I think entrepreneurs that are married have a leg up on their relationship than most people.
Yeah. Well, I think they can take the business principles and put them into their personal life too, which I think helps because they both have experience on the business side. I don't know if the communication style has to be any different. I think the support looks a little different. But I think the same, it's like you still want to have the hard conversation. You still want to work through, any issues, resolve conflict, I think is all still the same. Mm-hmm. But I think instead of talking through the dynamics of like running the business together and the personal life, it's even if they're both parties are working or one isn't and one's at home, or one is and one is at home, like what are the dynamics are, I think both communicating what their needs are in their current roles. And if there's a big project coming up or, a tight deadline or, and it doesn't always have to be work related. Like at home, I'd say like a tight deadline is like the new school year is approaching. Like as we come off summer, it's like, okay, we're going to have to get the kids registered for school. We have to, they're going to have meet and greets. They're going to have open house. They're going to have to get their school supplies. Like for someone who stays at home, like that's a tight deadline for them. And so I think it's recognizing no matter what it is, whether it's in the business and they have a big project and a tight deadline that they have to, prepare a presentation for a board meeting or whatever it might be. Like they're both equally stressful. Like the body doesn't know of like work stress for home stress. The body just knows it's stress. And so, but it's on both parties to one, speak up and communicate what they have going on and what they're feeling, and then figure out how can they support one another in those areas. Mm-hmm. So again, I think it's the same. Like you have to be able to communicate. You have to be open on when you have to be vulnerable to know like, I have a lot going on right now and here's what I'm feeling. And you have to be able to communicate that. And then the other person has to be open to like, okay, great. Like, let's figure out how we can support one another in this area.
What would you say to the guys out there that are out there busting their butts at work, right? Trying to provide for their families. And I hear this a lot on the guy's side. It's like, oh, my wife just spends all my money, like all this stuff. And yeah, it's like, here we go, another trip, or yeah, I've got to redo the house again. And it's like doing all these things, or my wife's like, you need to be home more, but I'm trying to provide for this and trying to do all these things. And there's this uneven, trying to think of the right word. Just these expectations for each other are not aligned. And maybe on both sides, whether it's the wife that is working and the dude's at home, or vice versa, there's this kind of idea that if I'm working, I'm doing something more important than at home. And then my wife is just at home watching the kids. That's an easy gig. And they're spending all my money.
Yeah.
Right?
Boy, that might be part of the problem. It's like spending all my money. It should be your money, like the family money, right? It should be together. Like this is our bank account, not my bank account and your bank account. I think it should be set up like a partnership. And I think looking at it like that, like a partnership, like there was at some point, I think people forget, like there was a point that you both made the decision for one to stay at home and one to go to work. Like at some point you sat down and had the conversation of like why this was the best thing for the family. And I think over time, because of the day-to-day, the whirlwind of the job, the whirlwind of staying at home with kids all day, it's like people forget. You forget why you made that decision at the time. And so, I think one realigning on, okay, is this the best right move for the family still? And I think that sometimes that's it too. It's like sometimes they made a decision 3-4 years previously, and it might not be the same decision that they need now. But nobody sits down and talks about it. Instead, they just continue to work through their, they continue to live in the frustration and then get resentment towards one another. And then they're both just mad all the time. Right? Instead of just being like, okay, does this still make sense? If it's yes, and we are aligned on why we made the decision in the first place, and then it's just a good reminder. And if not, it's okay to go back on the decision that you made before. And if someone wants to go back to work, or the kids need to go to daycare, whatever the case may be, like it's okay to make a different decision. You don't have to stick with the same decision that you made 3 or 4 years previously. You can change. Even a year, even you could test something out for a year. It's like, it doesn't matter. What matters is what's best for the family and that you're both aligned on whatever that is. And I feel like usually most of the time when I hear this, it's that somewhere along the line, there became a disconnect of why they made the decision and what the goal and the outcome is. And they just forgot about it.
Yes.
And I think just aligning on that would resolve a lot of it.
Which is why I think married couples in business together can crush it on both sides really, really well. Because in business, you can't rule your business with emotion. You have to think of it logically.
Yeah.
And you have to be open to change because the business cycle in the marketplace is always changing. So you're always questioning your current beliefs.
Yes.
And when you make assumptions in business, you're usually screwed.
Yep.
Unless those assumptions are based in first principles, right? And so within a relationship, if you can take that mindset and that frame of reference into your relationship and understand, cool, yeah, we did this for the last year or 2 years, but should we keep doing this? Like, is this making sense right now?
Yeah.
Is this the type of life that we want together? I think it's a simple question. It's like, are we currently living the life that we want?
We ask each other that all the time.
All the time. All the time. And it's a good checkpoint because it's like, okay, well, what needs to change? And I know a simple thing was like workout times, right? This is a perfect example. In the future now with in-laws they're renovating where they're at, and they technically live above our garage, and they're going to be renovating that spot. And usually we wake up and go to the gym. Well, for 6 to 8 weeks, we won't be able to do that. So we're going to have to switch that. But in the past, we always worked out usually in the evening. And we would take the kids to daycare at the gym, drop them off, go and work out. But we realized was like, is this really what we want? Because we're not really spending a ton of time. Because we get done with work, we'd pick them up from daycare, hadn't seen them all day. We go immediately to the gym, drop them off at daycare at the gym, work out for an hour, hour and a half, back home, and then it's dinner, bed.
Like right to bed.
Yeah, so like very little interaction.
Yeah.
And then it was like, this isn't working. Like, is this what we want?
Yeah.
And it was like, no, okay. So we need to make a sacrifice. That means we need to wake up earlier and wake up earlier and get the workout in before. And we went through phases where we would rotate. I would go early, you would go next, or vice versa.
Yeah.
And then, so someone could be home with the kids. And now we're in a position up until in the next couple weeks, but like we're in a position where we can leave and our kids are fine because in-laws are still there and everything's there.
Yeah.
We just go together in the morning. But that gives us the evenings with the kids and allows us to have the life that we want to.
Yep.
I think it's really important to just question that. It's like, is this the life that we really want?
Yeah.
And have that freedom and understand that you can make the changes. If this is not what you both are aligned on, then let's make changes. And there has to be some sort of like understanding of compromise on both sides, where there might be a season of life where it's like financially we're not in a position to do this, which means that I may have to put in more hours, or you may have to get a side job, or we may have to do this in order to achieve the long-term vision of what we want.
Yeah. If those are things that you want.
Correct.
Right. So I think that's where a lot of the frustration comes in, where, you know, you had mentioned it's like, oh, you know, she just wants to take trips or spend the money or whatever. It's like she likely, he or she, whoever is the one staying at home with the kids.
Doesn't matter.
They want to make, you know, memories. And for them, like that is their like time together as a family because the other person's working, you know, all the time. So it's like, if you want to have those things, it's talking through like, okay, well, here's what that's going to look like to be able to support and do that. The trade-off is I might not be at home every night, or I might have to, you know, work on the weekends, or you might have to get a side job, whatever the case may be. But talking through that and understanding, okay, well, to have this, here's what we're going to have to do. Do you want me to do all these things that are going to require, you know, X amount of my attention to be able to provide for these things? But I think it's like outlining it that way and like fully just like painting the picture of here's what it's going to look like. It allows you to make a non-emotion based decision of like, okay, like if they know like this is what the outcome's going to be, it's like either yes, they want to go with that decision, or no, they don't. But at least they see the full picture of what it's going to look like.
Yep. Clear expectations.
Yeah.
It's the biggest piece.
Expectations and communication. Key.
You set clear expectations. You're good to go.
Yeah.
Like it. We good?
I think it's good.
Cool. I love you.
Love you too.